Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi mahana ki a koutou. Ngā mihi nui ki ngā mahi o Te Kaunihira, and welcome to our visitors too. Kei te miki a koe, Kim. I'll open with karakia. Tuia ki runga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki roto, tuia ki waho, tuia tātua te tangata, ki te kaupapa o te hui nei, ki te kaupapa o te rangi nei. Mauri ora ki a tātou katoa. We've got Councillor Mackenzie on Zoom. You can hear me, I think. There's a wee southern hand up there. And we'll keep an eye out for your hands up for your input. Yeah, lovely. And I think the other people are staff. I can't quite read that from here. Oh yes, there it's Catherine. Kia ora, Catherine. So we've got media here on Zoom. Apologies. I've got an apology from Mayor King and Councillor Greening. Is somebody happy to move that be accepted? The remover for the apologies. Some pen waving over there. Councillor Walker, and seconded by Councillor Butler. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. Board member Grant Knowles, sorry. I didn't mean to acknowledge you at the beginning, but do come and join us at the table. Thank you. Grant's from the Golden Bay, the fantastic Golden Bay Community Board. We have no people registered to speak in public forum. Are there any declarations of interest? No. We've got some minutes to be confirmed at the minutes of the Environment and Regulatory Committee meeting held on Thursday, 16th of March, be confirmed as a true and correct record. Is somebody happy to move? Thank you. Councillor Maru, and can we have a seconder for the minutes, please? Councillor Mayling. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. And we have some minutes from the Animal Control Subcommittee that Councillor Mayling, Bryant and myself are members of, so it'll need to be. You're happy to move? Happy to move, Madam Chair. Thank you, Councillor Bryant, and seconded Councillor Mayling. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Carried, thank you. We've got two presentations today, and the first is from Jan for Mapua District and Community Association on wastewater overflows in Mapua. So welcome, and we're going with 15 minutes, and if it can be 10 with some room for clarifying questions, that will be good. And I think given that we've got a wastewater report happening a bit later on our agenda, there'll be opportunity there for councillors to ask questions, perhaps in response to what's presented today. But welcome, and over to you.
Thank you. Let's jump right into it. All right. No response, sorry. So very briefly about me, I've recently retired, but I've been a professional in the space of wastewater and stormwater planning for a very long time, 40 odd years, and I advised many councils over the last 10 years as a consultant before working for local government overseas and here. The basis for the presentation is some overflows happening in Mapua. I'm a resident there, and I've took it up on me to help the Mapua District Community Association to get their head around what was actually happening, and writing some correspondence with parts of council. Where do I point? So a little bit of wastewater 101, which I think is important. Wastewater overflows, wet weather overflows are unavoidable. You can't have a zero overflow network. It's like asking it to stop raining. So overflows are a fact. In my experience, the only thing you can do as a council is spend money on your network to improve its performance so you can reduce or minimize the frequency, but not eliminate. We all know that the main problem for those overflows is inflow and infiltration water, stormwater getting into the pipes. But if you have an overflow problem, reducing inflow and infiltration is often not an effective solution. It's typically way more effective to build storage or capacity rather than to reduce inflow and infiltration. In order to do all the planning work, you need to have network models. Those are computer models that are calibrated and basically mimic real what's happening out there, and you use them to do your forward planning. And what I didn't say is there is a report also given to you with a lot more detail than what I'm saying now. So hopefully you received that. So Tasman doesn't appear to have a performance target. And it's really important that, I mean, I've been working for probably 15, 20 councils in New Zealand. Typically, a council sets themselves a target because that only can tell you when you pass or when you fail and when you need to do investments or not to improve your network. So it's important to have an agreed performance target. And a design standard is not a target. And that gives you the ability to basically report performance against the target and also gives you the ability to justify scope and cost and prioritize improvement works. And more often than not, that target is also used in the consenting process. We asked some questions of the regulator from this council. And basically with the same information that you have here, and said, where's the consent? And we had a 3-page letter with lots of questions. The only question that was answered about the consent, and the regulator said, no, we can't give consent because it's a prohibited activity. And yes, there is a clause in the TRMP that says you cannot discharge untreated effluent. So they kind of using that or hiding behind that particular clause in the TRMP to say, no, we can't consent. But the fact is there are many overflows in Tasman, not just in Mapua. So that constitutes an illegal activity from council, by council. And there's no enforcement at all in place. I've asked many times, there's no enforcement. Sometimes there's a please explain report and some promises to do things better, but there's nothing that even looks like enforcement. So basically my conclusion is TDC does not follow its own rules. Now, my opinion is if you actually look closer at that clause in the TRMP, it's actually never written for wastewater networks. It's written for effluent discharges from dairy farms, potentially wastewater discharges from individual properties. But the word network is never used in the explanation behind the plan in the next clause. So there's an attachment here that shows you that. So in my opinion, a network consent should be applied for. Maybe it needs a new interpretation of what that rule is actually meant for and use other parts of the TRMP to actually go for a consent. And because the staff clearly is not reluctant to do that, it needs probably a decision from you elected members to make them do that. Then I had a look at the technical documents. In the technical documents, interesting, the network operator clearly says we have no intention to meet the zero overflow standard. So basically, they're consciously non-complying with the interpretation of the legal team. So there's a deliberate non-compliance and nobody acts on it. Everybody's silent. It's only when the community picks it up, hopefully things will change. So they're intentionally being illegal. There's also no intention to undertake performance assessment, as I said, building models and undertaking performance assessments for all networks. There's one performance report for Motueka, but that's pretty much all. There's one for Waimea that's 20 years old, and it's absolutely not fit for purpose, even admitted by the staff. And doing forward planning is cost efficient. I mean, there's this rapidly declining influence. Everybody knows that graph. They say the more you do forward planning, the cheaper it becomes, because otherwise you get reactive and everything becomes more expensive. So there's no plan to set an improvement and performance target. And if I look at the improvement works, I had a list of works in the LTP. I think they're very, very poorly justified, with the exception of one type, which is emergency storage. And then if you look at the process that was used in Motueka, it doesn't use the New Zealand modeling guidelines. And the models are overly simplistic. It doesn't include climate change. I mean, I've listed a whole lot of things, and there's more detail in the report, but it's actually not good practice what is being done at the moment. If I look at the overflow records that were provided, again, clearly evidence of illegal activity with no action. The August 22 event, which basically triggered all of this, that's probably the one event that's probably a bit of good news. I would say if there was a performance target, it would be the event you'd say, well, you know, that was a storm, but they were never designed for it, so it doesn't actually need any reaction. But some overflows lasted 3 days, which I think is unheard of. And in Mapua, we saw actually pumps being used to pump out the wastewater straight into the estuary in the eyes of the public. And that's totally unavoidable when you have emergency overflow constructions, which again are prohibited through that interpretation of law of the TRMP. I have to say, having been involved in many councils across New Zealand, I've seen better, but also a lot of councils much worse. If you look at Auckland and Wellington, they overflow pretty much every rainfall event. That's not the case here. It's not as bad as it can get. But if you don't do anything, it will get that. And the only thing I have to say on reporting is my experience that the overflows are always underreported. So it's probably a lot worse in reality. Quickly on the Three Waters reform, I've been involved a little bit. There's a lot of uncertainty around it. From this point of view, a fit for purpose consent conditions and justified capital works based on the fact that you need to make those consent conditions will provide more certainty for TDC and its community that the wastewater network is looked after well after handing over to a new entity, whatever that is going to be. In conclusion, TDC doesn't follow its own rules, doesn't apply good planning practice, capital works plan is poorly justified, and there's actually no intention to change anything about it. My recommendation would be to establish an agreed and affordable performance standard or target to provide a reliable network model for every network and undertake performance assessments. Just justify your works program based on that and not what's currently in the LTP. Put a consent in place based on the target and allow for all of the above in the LTP. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for clarification? So it's helpful, I think. There's been correspondence between you and TDC and the Mapua Association, and councillors are aware of that, have been sent that out just as background reading too, so that's helpful. And I think just now the time is for just clarifying questions of Jan. And there'll be opportunity later, as I've already said, to check in with Carl and Sean and Kim too around if there are things that you're wanting to ask in response to what Jan's brought forward. But are there any questions for now? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Just a point of clarification, because I'd like to know, Jan, when you said that in the August flood events, that we were pumping direct straight out to the estuary. Was that in the fact the council was in a state of emergency? Do you know?
I believe it was.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Kinnemont.
Thank you, through the chair. These recommendations, you've got bullet points to them, but obviously some of these things are going to take years to get through in the system. So it's probably not more of a request, it's more of a statement that it's something that won't happen straight away. What you're proposing is going to take some years to implement.
In my experience, a council the size of Tasman, it would probably take 3 to 5 years to work through this process. But you have to have the funds in place to allow you to do that. And you have the intention, you have to have the intention to actually achieve what I'm recommending. And there's none of that at the moment.
Councillor Shellcrest.
G'day, Jan. Here you go.
Hey.
Obviously, you've been in this game for a while. Do you have any rough idea what sort of costs would be involved in putting some of these your recommendations? Just roughly, I mean, not doing.
It's a hard one because I haven't got all the technical information about what it's largely based on the information that's already available. I have to admit that building network models is by far the most expensive part of it. And part of that is gauging, flow gauging, because you have to calibrate them. So you have to put gauges in the pipes to measure flows. So that's not cheap. And that's one of the reasons why in the correspondence with the technical staff say it's prohibitively expensive. Well, I dispute that because the investments coming out of that are magnitudes bigger than the investments in doing proper planning. So, but I don't know, a couple of $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000. I would sort of that order of magnitude. I would say I've actually done some planning for Wellington Water about 3 years ago to actually set out the whole program and how that could be achieved. So it's not hard.
Thank you.
Councillor McKenzie.
Yes, through you, Chair. Sorry, Jan, I'm not the person today, but I guess thank you for your presentation and your slides, which were well laid out. Thanks for mentioning that we're not up to Wellington standard. That's a comfort. We all read about that in the paper. So I guess, you know, I mean, I might just perhaps give a heads up that at some stage, particularly as we're embarking on the LTP discussions, that, you know, I would like to understand the council's response to each of the points that you're raising in the same kind of clear and concise way that you've put it across. So I don't have a question for you, but just to say that I appreciate the fact that you're raising these points, and we do need to follow through to understand what the council's response is and whether as councillors we're happy with that. So I think that's for a future discussion.
Thank you, councillor. Well articulated. Councillor Mayland.
Thanks for your presentation, Jan. Are you aware of the situation in Nelson City with their consent for overflows?
No, not particularly. I've reviewed some of the work, but not in relation to consent.
Because they do have a consent. I think it's called an arbitration overflow. But you still end up with an overflow into the estuary. So even though they've got a consent, it doesn't make it any better for the estuary. And my understanding is we around the district, them and us have been putting in some storage for this very thing, but you never have enough.
Well, I was trying to make exactly the point. The outcome actually could be cheaper for Tasman than more expensive, because if you set yourself a target, I showed that diminishing returns curve. So if you would aim for a zero overflow, you would be way out of range, would be never affordable. Now, the councils I've advised always end up in the knee of the curve somewhere, where like you get bang for buck, and at some point you don't. And that's where council set it. So storage could help meeting that target. But if you have an unquantified target, like what I'm hearing or interpreting from Nelson, you basically keep spending money without actually knowing what you're actually going to achieve. So having no target is, I think it's just really bad practice.
So are you aware that we've had problems in Mapua where people, even in new subdivisions, we ended up with stormwater going into our sewage system. And it was done by poor plumbing, and people have a habit of raising their gardens around their gully traps. So in actual fact, most of or a significant number of our issues actually come from within the community. And we do some inspections. So we had a serious problem in Mapua with some poor plumbing practices, and we ended up with overflows at school. This would be 3 years ago, I would think.
If I can
And
respond.
I think the manager at the back is nodding, because that's from my memory. Were you aware of that?
Yes, I'm aware of it, and having leaky systems even in new developments is something I've come across for as long as I'm in New Zealand. So I think that's a fair observation. What I do disagree on is typically through the measurements I've been involved in, around 50% is from private properties, but the other 50% is from council properties. And you have this threshold or tipping point, if you like. So there's a lot of water getting into the sewers. If you take all the private properties off, you're still not meeting the amount of reduction of inflow and infiltration that gets it to a level that you actually effectively can reduce overflows. I've seen so much money spent on sewers with what I would call a scattergun approach without making any difference in wastewater overflows. I'm happy to give technical presentations to technical staff on that issue, but there is a huge risk that if you just aim at private properties, that you will not actually measurably reduce overflows.
So in Richmond, we've got a pressurised system in our lower part, so we don't get that infiltration, as I understand it, in those systems. So I know there is some discussion about rolling out pressurised systems, but hugely expensive for the community going forward. But in our Richmond West area, we have a pressurised system with a pump at each house, and that certainly overcomes the problem that you're talking about.
But it's very expensive.
Thank you. Thank you, Jan. We've come to time's up, and thank you for your presentation. You said some strong things there too, and among your, the technical experience you have. So we'll certainly be seeking some response, and it's a strong thing to say that we're intentionally being illegal. So we'll get some reframing of that, I think. We'll see what the framing is from staff here, and thank you, councillors, for your contribution. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Welcome Scott Burnett from Forest and Bird. We've got a presentation on nature-based solutions post-Cyclone Gabrielle, with a focus particularly on Tasman District. And I think you're going to introduce Tom Kay. Is that happening?
Yes, that's right.
It's happening. And thank you. With Jan's presentation too, it's really helpful to have the presentations ahead of time to be able to go through and with background information to them. So let's go 10 minutes about, and then we'll have some time for some questions. Thank you. Over to you.
Kia ora tātou, e mihi ana ki ngā rangatira. Ko Scott Burnett, taku ingoa, e mahi ana te reo te taiao. I'm Scott Burnett. I'm the Regional Conservation Manager for Forest and Bird for Te Tauihu. And I'm joined today by Tom Kay, who is our National Freshwater Expert. And Tom is going to be presenting on nature-based solutions, things that TDC can do to address climate risks in a way that's not negatively impacting upon our ecosystems or our environment. Just briefly, Forest and Bird is New Zealand's largest and oldest non-governmental conservation organisation, and it's funded by its members and donors. I'll hand over to Tom now. Thank you.
Kia ora, everyone. I'm Tom. I'm the Freshwater Advocate at Forest and Bird. I understand my slides are up on a screen somewhere, so maybe I just say when to flip through to the next one, and that'll hopefully happen. we've been talking to people a lot about nature-based solutions recently, starting with talking about the Tutaikuri River in Hawke's Bay, because, oh, excellent. On the 14th of Feb, as Cyclone Gabriel smashed Te Tairāwhiti in the Hawke's Bay region, the Tutaikuri River was flowing at over 1,800 cubic meters per second, or 1,800 tons of water was coming down that river, passing a single point every second. The flow gauge got taken out, so the flow was probably higher. And by 8 o'clock that morning, if you want to flick to the next slide, the river had taken out the substation that powered most of Napier. And by 10:30, if we go to the next slide, the river was overtopping the stop banks on both sides of the river, flooding Waiheke on one side and Taradale, the suburb at the north, at the top of the picture there as well, the suburb which I grew up in, which my parents and my sister and niece and nephew still live in two houses about 600 meters from the river. Flooding the streets, if you flick to the next picture of those suburbs, my family's house is really lucky they were just up above the floodwaters, but others in those areas have yellow stickered homes, as I understand it. It's one, of course, of a whole range of events. If you flick to the next slide, that event itself had a massive impact across the region, taking out bridges and all sorts of things. But it's just one in a long list of events across the country. Auckland, Nelson just before that, and of course Tasman not immune to this kind of thing. Not to mention the West Coast, Canterbury floods, Edgecombe in 2017, all sorts of things. After the event, if we flip to the next slide, Principal Climate Scientist Dr. Sam Dean at NIWA said, "I have no doubt whatsoever in my mind that climate change has influenced that event." And Met Service, after the event, if you go to the next slide, said that these events will just become more severe as the planet continues to warm. So heavier rain and more problems from flooding. But it's not just climate change that's doing this, it's also the way we've degraded our environment. So we've taken the wetlands off the landscape, this showing the wetland extent, predicted historic wetland extent on the left and the current wetland extent on the right, huge wetland complexes in our landscape that we've taken away, obviously this being your region. And we see that during these heavy rainfall events. If we flick to the next slide, some area of pasture in central Hawke's Bay before Cyclone Gabriel. And then the next image shows what happened to that area. All was predicted to be historic wetland, and nature just comes straight back in when those heavy events happen. We've done the same thing to our forests. If we go to the next slide, stripping forests off the hillsides, again, looking down at the Tasman region there, huge amount of forest, native forest gone, replaced with pasture and pines. And we see that again in the impact of these events. If we go to the next slide, this image taken of the hillsides in Hawke's Bay after the event, very similar, unfortunately, to what happened after Cyclone Bola. And finally, we've done the same thing to our rivers. If we look at the Motueka River in the next image, this is the channel in the 1940s, plenty of space, this kind of anastomizing, almost braided type character. If we go to the next image, we see that we're increasingly pushing those rivers in on themselves into single channels. An example from the Hawke's Bay, where we've just seen this event, shows the Ngaruroro River back in the 1940s compared to the river now, if we flick forward, channelized with willows and stop banks. And then we see the impact again in the next images, zoomed in on this before Cyclone Gabriel, and then after, if we go to the next image, these rivers just reclaiming that space, blowing through or over top of stop banks and then cutting down into them in numerous places. And there's all these unintended consequences to that kind of thing. If we go to the next diagram, we see how these rivers become perched up above the up above the floodplain. That little graph at the bottom there shows you the sort of floodplain shape with the two stop banks sticking up, and the rivers just start to fill those gaps with gravel until they become perched up above the communities around them. There was a paper written last year, if we go to the next slide, by some river experts. They said on the next slide that working against nature does not work, that we may inadvertently be manufacturing future disasters, and moving out of harm's way saves lives. Sorry, you can flip through that next slide as well, and we'll go to the report that was written after Cyclone Bola by the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment at the time that said really similar stuff 30 years ago. Flicking through these slides as I read them, the draining of wetlands has intensified flooding problems in many areas as wetlands can buffer flood flows. River control schemes require continuous assessment and maintenance to secure their integrity. That means, you have to do a lot all the time and they're expensive to keep doing that. And unwise intensive development behind stop banks has often been encouraged. And finally, pastoral farming cannot be considered a sustainable land use of much of the hill country. Afforestation is probably the only realistic, economically viable erosion control option. We've known this stuff for 30 years, but we've known it internationally as well. This concept of making room for rivers, the idea that having narrow stop banks concreted in means floodwaters are perched up above the floodplain, and the communities behind them are at risk when that fails, because that water has enormous energy. When those stop banks are wider or rivers have more space, that floodwater is lower, there's less energy behind it, and there's more space for nature, for wetlands, for recreation, and communities are safer, and there's less intervention required. We're starting to see this being picked up in New Zealand. If we flick through to the next slide, there's Greater Wellington Regional Council's just acquired all these properties alongside the Hutt River to widen the section of the river at a pinch point. If you go to the next slide, you'll see they're replacing it with green space, widening the river by 90 metres. Horizons are doing something similar with the management of their rivers, this being the Rangitike River, where they had tried to hem the river into this sort of single channel thing, as you can see on the left where it has been, and they're recognising that actually there's stop banks further out, and they're going to have a mobility corridor for that river, where they actually start to get rid of the introduced vegetation, put back native vegetation, and let the river use the space that it has there, rather than constantly trying to fight it back. And elsewhere we're seeing, well, Greater Wellington again, seeing wetlands and things being retired for carbon sequestration and as stormwater infrastructure. There might be this perception that we're waiting for direction from central government to do something about this if we flick to the next slide, but there are things that TDC can do now. Going to the next slide, one of the things is policy and zoning tools. You've got an opportunity through NPSFM plan changes to do things differently. Greater Wellington, again, as an example, is already looking at how they can change their hazard mitigation policy to strike through this consideration of hard engineering methods in the first instance, and instead looking first at green infrastructure, room for the river, or Mātauranga Māori options as being better. If we go to the next slide, there's things like your river management and your river management plans. You've got a TDC Rivers Activity Management Plan. It doesn't refer to this kind of stuff, and it could. Climate hazard risk assessment, we understand you're doing one, and that's a great opportunity to look at how nature-based solutions can help you reduce emissions and reduce risk to the community while restoring the environment. And also how you look at management of council-owned land and reserves and parks, thinking about sponge cities, wetlands as carbon sinks, stormwater basins, and the management of commercial pine forestry, which we understand you have some of, knowing that we took a learning from Cyclone Bola, which was plant trees on hillsides, but we planted the wrong sorts of trees, and we've got problems with that. There's also things like annual and long-term planning, particularly your 30-year infrastructure plans that fund this kind of stuff, thinking about the actual cost and benefit over a longer period rather than just a year, and looking at things like education and information for the public with flood risk maps and water-sensitive design advice. We know people are averse to lines on maps, but it's a conversation that we increasingly need to have. And working with community initiatives to fund sorts of things. The environmental groups that are doing things on the ground are doing a service. They're doing a conservation service. They're also doing an infrastructure service. And it's really important that you fund those. And you've got huge opportunities with the Nature Conservancy operating in your region. They've actually got experience internationally doing things like floodplains by design, which is an idea around making room for rivers and natural floodplain management. We can, if we flick to the next slide, have these landscapes that are diverse and connected, from source to sea with hillsides and native bush, valleys and native bush, and still farmed and used for urban things and productive agriculture and things, but having critical source areas that are planted up and restored with wetlands and all sorts of things like that. I'll leave you with a quote from the Bola report, or two quotes that were really just, kind of prescient, if that's the right word. A possible effect of climate change is that cyclones of some form could pass close to New Zealand with increasing frequency. It may be that in retrospect, the Bola storm will not be regarded as such an extreme event. That was, almost 30 years ago, or whatever it is. And I think we've hit that point now. And the other quote from this report that I think is really good is that in the interest of future generations, government cannot allow the nation's soil resource to be degraded or the nation's floodplain land to be unwisely used. Mitigation of downstream impacts, or the true benefits of this kind of approach of soil conservation include mitigation of downstream impacts on water quality, flooding, and retention of the soil resource for future generations. Those are the things that have real value to society. We'll leave it at that, and we'll take questions if you have any.
Thank you, Tom. Impactful slides, aren't they? Scott, do you want to add anything extra? We just can go for some questions, yeah. And we have Councillor Mayland first.
Thank you, Tom, for your report. It's very insightful. And I look at what we've traditionally done in New Zealand is we've tried to farm right up to the edge of the river. And where I was born and bred, the river was 2 miles wide in British Columbia. And where they crossed it in a bridge was 1 mile wide. And I was there last year, and they had major flooding of city of well over 100,000 people because they had allowed themselves to farm up to an edge of a river, and we've done it in this country too. And I can think of people in the Motueka catchment that use council reserve land to farm, and they complain when it does get flooded. But it's actually nature. You can't control rivers because when the events happen, they will flood and they will take that land back. So we just need to learn to live with our rivers, I think, as we go forward. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, that's the exact conclusion that's actually made by, you as someone who's experienced this firsthand. That's the same conclusion that's reached by the geomorphologists who have written papers about this stuff, basically saying that we can't fight it, and the easiest way is actually to step back and live with rivers. And in fact, that is actually the most cost-effective thing to do over the long term, because if we don't do that, we're hit with serious impacts and costs and catastrophic failures at times when we don't expect them. And we're much better having a conversation now about how we live with them and how we decide which places will flood and sorts of things like that, rather than facing that catastrophic impact later on.
Thank you, Councillor Butler.
Thanks for your presentation, Tom. I just wanted to ask a question. We have an ongoing dialogue with our community about gravel in rivers and the removal of gravel. And of course, we've got, a lot of expertise within our council staff about this. We've also got community members who've lived next to rivers for generations. So I'd just be interested to have a comment from you about, when you've got quite some dynamic rivers and some rivers that are less dynamic, about is there a role for judicious, and from the point of view of Forest and Bird, does Forest and Bird have a view about whether there's a role for judicious removal of gravel or not at all? Does it depend on whether or not the river has been contained with stop banks, etc.? Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think it's actually really river specific, as I understand it. So in some cases, there was a story on RNZ actually this morning, I think possibly yesterday, about a river on the west coast which has been constrained with stop banks, and as a result, the gravel aggradation in that river is about double the rate that it naturally would be, because it's just got limited space and it's filling that up extremely quickly. In cases like that, long term, we do need to probably be looking at how we step back from that and maybe how we can change the sediment supply further up the catchment. Has that catchment been cleared of vegetation and that's why all that gravel is coming down, or is that something that's natural and we're going to have to live with? In which case, if you decide that you're extracting gravel, you're going to accept that you're going to be doing that for a long time at continued cost. And if that's the intervention that's being taken, then that's fine, that's the decision that's made, but that might not be the best long-term solution for that catchment. It might be that other places, there are places where you say, look, getting in and doing this gravel extraction over and over again is not the most sustainable option. We could step back from the river, we've got space, we could reforest some of the hillsides, or we could not cut down the pines that we've got up on the hillside, which is going to exacerbate that problem. So it's really about understanding the history of each river, where it's been in the past, what's going on upstream in the catchment, and then you can make that decision going, is it really feasible for us to be in there every year digging out gravel? Is there a big impact on the ecology of that river in doing that? Or is there a better solution?
Thank you. Anybody else? Sounds a bit like last orders, doesn't it? Thank you both for coming in. I don't know if you've appreciate what you're raising for sure, but I doubt there are many people in this room that don't have the concerns that you do too, and certainly within council. We're working towards quite a bit of what you raise, and we'd love a big bucket of resource for sure to better roll out much quicker some of the programs that we are rolling out. Just checking if Christine McKenzie, Councillor McKenzie, you're good there. I can't quite see, but you're a good thumbs up there. Thank you both for coming in, and your presentation has been impactful, and we'll certainly stay aware of what you're bringing forward today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Cheers. We're going to move to our group managers report. Over to you, Kim.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll take my group manager's report as read. You'll see it's a relatively short one today. What that's signalling is there's quite a bit of backlog material coming through from our government by way of government direction that we haven't got the finality wrapped around yet. The report also sort of signposts some of the presentations that we're having today, a couple of which we've already heard. And it talks about some of the conversations that we're having around the community at the moment, trying to gear up the community for the, I guess, the range of reforms that are coming their way. Most particularly, they apply in the rural settings. So I'm touching on that as well. And I know that many of the councillors here, having already commented on being interested in joining in on those days, have taken the opportunity to do so. And so we do have staff here today if there was any desire to reflect on some of the messages heard. Certainly we've got staff to support that discussion.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? And we require a mover and a seconder with a report. Councillor Dowler.
Yeah, I'm here to move the report. I do have a question about the rural conversation events, if that's okay. I attended up in Muriori the other day and I was very impressed with what came over and the way it was managed. Unfortunately, there weren't many horticultural farmers there due to the fact that they're all full on doing their harvest, apples and kiwi fruit, etc. So will there be an opportunity for them to possibly get together with you guys in the not too distant future after they finish in about 5 or 6 weeks' time?
Can I invite Jane to comment on that? I think Jane's on.
Are you there,
Yes.
Jane?
Sure.
Someone will be running into her office.
She did have another appointment at 2, but I believe she was still there in that moment. She's not showing. Here she is.
Let's come back to that.
Well, perhaps I could just refer that to Mirka.
He's come forward, please, Mirka.
We are planning on running the event again in the spring. So when the pastoral farmers are busy with their spring activities, we're going to do the same event for the horticultural industry.
Aroha mai for interrupting you. Could you just bring the mic right up close? Thank you very much.
So we are planning on running the same events for the horticulturalists in the springtime when the pastoral farmers are busy.
You have to move. Councillor Butler and then Councillor Mackenzie and then Councillor Walker. No.
Sorry, I've got a question.
Great. Thank you.
I'm happy to. Oh, is it me? Am I going? What?
Oh, yes, Councillor Butler.
Yeah, I'm happy to second. And I just had a question about the transitional definition of highly productive land, and we're required to apply this when considering resource consent applications. And are we envisaging that there's going to be any difficulty over that? Is that actually going to, is this a new thing, and is it actually going to require more resources or slow down our already struggling consent processes?
So the MPS for highly productive land is something that's been with us for a number of months, but I think it's fair to say it is still pretty new in terms of its impact. And I'd ask Katrina perhaps to answer your question more directly.
Afternoon. Yes, as Kim just alluded to, it is quite an evolving national policy statement that we're going to have to take into effect. It also comes into effect with consents that have already been lodged and they're in the process. So we've still got to take into consideration. So it is a policy statement that will probably is taking already some extra staff time through interpreting, working through the guidance document that's actually larger than the national policy statement itself. So that gives you an understanding of the complexities around some of these things. And obviously we've got wider things that are going on with potentially conflicting government legislation coming through with freshwater, etc. So yeah, something the team is working through and will take extra time. For sure.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Yeah, thank you through you, Chair. I had a question about this as well, Kim, when I was reading your report. So I just want to check that I properly understand it. So when we did the future development strategy, we had a degree of information about the NPS on highly productive land that was going to come out. And so we have signalled in the FDS parcels of land for future potential development, subject to resource consents. And that FDS has a 30-year life, even though we do review it on a regular basis. So in your paper, when you talk about the transitional definition of highly productive land, so if it's identified for future urban development, which I'm assuming would be via the FDS mechanism, then it's not deemed to be highly productive land. So am I correct in assuming that all of those parcels in the FDS, if we chose to, we could say that they weren't available, that actually we didn't need to apply the HPL classifications because we've deemed them for development, if you see what I mean. I'm trying to sort of work out whether it's the cart or the horse.
So through the chair, my take on that, and there might be others who have a stronger understanding, is that the national regulation is a dominant factor here. The future development strategy is well intended, and it looked at the national direction that was available at the time, but it's the national policy statement for highly productive land that takes precedent. And that requires some interpretation around to understand exactly where that sort of sits. And that's the role that Katrina has indicated. The consents team are indicating a desire to bring a bit more of a discussion piece through to this committee so we can get a better understanding of the fit, because there's probably been less attention given to that national policy statement than perhaps is required. And Katrina's got a few thoughts to add to that.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. I know that this probably would have raised some eyebrows to start off with, and there's not all the information at this time. So that was the plan, is to bring this back later, and it would be probably to clarify the future development strategy through Jackie and the team and the work she's doing in that 10-year document. So we just need, the plan is to bring back that wider knowledge, and even Merca's team and consenting. So, and give you a bit more examples around what we have got in front of us at the moment, what we're recommending even to decline because of this MPS. So it's already starting to create some real issues. I'm happy to have some more offline discussions, but I think it'd be quite good to workshop this a bit more at the next, I just weren't totally prepared with everything that's going on for this meeting, but I really think it's important that we do discuss this. We have had a good meeting with Tim King around a few examples and options there. So we have started to have some conversations.
If I may, just through the chair, I think that would be really useful, because I've got a certain way that I've been thinking about this based on what I've been told in the past, but I'm getting the feeling that it is a changing situation. So I would like to really understand the relationship between the FDS and the MPS. So I'd welcome a chance to explore that more. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mailing and then Councillor Bryant.
Well, I was just going to comment on my understanding, and it's difficult because you get a direction from central government to provide for housing, and you get a direction from central government to protect highly productive land, and there is always going to be tension, and I think that's the best way of describing it. There is tension between the two, and it doesn't matter what we do. We have to provide for housing. And it's great to go along the hills because that's not as productive land. And it's a very bad thing to go out on the Waimea Plains, where we've got highly productive land. And I'm thinking on the other side of the Appleby Highway where I used to live. And we produce apples, grapes, kiwi fruit, you name it. And it's highly productive and it's irrigated. But there is always going to be tension. And it is a lot easier for councils and communities to build around clusters that are already existing because the infrastructure is already there and you're just adding to it. But it doesn't stop that tension going forward. And I think that's a bit that Katrina probably becomes very difficult as a consent planner. And I think for councils, when you get this direction, and a classic example recently was one about nitrates from the government, and then another one about providing for more vegetable growing that came out just after some events. So we get mixed messages. And I think that's something we as a council just have to grapple with going forward. And it just takes time. And it's not something that's actually that new in some ways.
Thank you. Did you want to comment there, Kim?
Just through the chair, and that is also that challenge is signalled in my report. The apparent dichotomy between the direction coming out and then the expectations that despite or with that direction, you'll still be able to continue to provide vegetables for your community. And of all of the areas that probably where that hits the most, Tasman is right in the spotlight for how that balance sort of plays out.
Isn't it good that we're playing out a balance? Hey, I think that's I think the time's come, and I think it's changing times in terms of what gets privileged and prioritised, and we're in the midst of a rebalancing, I think, around how everything gets addressed. Councillor Bryant.
Yeah, Madam Chair, just returning to the rural conversations events that Kim alluded, just would like to, for us, I attended both the Rotary and Murchison one, and councillors attended most of them across the district. Just like to show our appreciation to the staff for the huge effort they put in, because it's a huge effort to organise those things and all the people and the logistics on the day and everything and the preparation for that. So I think that we should really appreciate the effort they did there. And as I understand it, we were pretty much well received everywhere we went. So firstly, we'd like to do that. The one issue that was raised would be at both Murchison and Lake Rotorua is the thorn in the side of some people of outstanding natural features and outstanding natural landscapes and wetland identification and SNAs. Just wondered if we could have some cover off broadly where those projects are, where we are with our responsibilities about them.
Yeah, there was a brief update will come through at the next report of the environmental management team. So that's due to the next committee, which will put the balance where those things are at.
Thank you. Councillor Kinnemont.
Thank you. Through the chair, your report clause 9.1 is regarding the drinking water standards, and that give a bit of a heads up. Ministry of the Environment has proposed some changes. Now, Cabinet has approved a number of those changes. So I was wondering, how do those changes suit Tasman District Council? Are we happy with the new direction that the report's going?
Through the chair. So the information I've provided there is the full extent of the information that's come to us from the Ministry for the Environment at this point in time. However, I am part of the Te Reo Kahika Network, which is the Resource Managers Group, and we'll be meeting in Wellington in 2 weeks' time. It's all of the regional and unitary authorities, and it's typical for us to get a greater insight to the matters that have just been sort of spread quite generally. So we expect to have more information on where that's landed, and from there we can make a better assessment of whether that works for the region or for the district.
Thank you. Anyone else? I just, from me, on terms of the rural conversations, that we had a workshop this morning and we were speaking about that quite a bit, and I think it's good to bring it up more publicly, as Councillor Bryant has. I went to the event in Collingwood. I think we had probably 30 people there, and a number of staff presenting what is, when you look at it all together, is an overwhelming amount of, sort of legislation and change and things that need to be attended to. And I just also really value the way staff have gone about doing that. And I think the congruence in presenting that they are available to help, in this case, farmers, understand what's required by the various pieces of legislation and the requirements in them. It's not an easy thing to do, and to, we are the meat and the sandwich, and at times I feel very good about the accessibility of staff to landowners, and particularly in the new catchment role. So Kat was out there, and I think she's got her dream job actually. And and I think we've got something good going in terms of being available and being effective and engaged where we need to be. Yep. And I just note on in terms of the action list, I think we've got a couple more things coming on here. That we've got a presentation to the Motuwiki Catchment Program on here at a future ENR meeting. And then we've got from Rob and Steve to provide a report on feral cats to a future meeting. So those things are coming up. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for your report. It's been moved by Councillor Dowler and seconded by Councillor Butler. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. And next on the agenda was the moorings bylaw report, which has been withdrawn, and a fuller report will go straight to council for the adoption of the bylaw, and that's been withdrawn from this agenda on the advice of the council legal team. Don't know if anything further is required than that. So we move to a report called the Introduction to the Compliance Monitoring Program for On-Site and Municipal Wastewater in Tasman District, and this sits with Carl and with Sean. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before Sean starts, I'd just like to quickly introduce him because he hasn't actually presented to council before, so it's an opportunity to introduce to the councillors. That's okay. So Sean's our compliance monitoring officer for our on-site and municipal wastewater. So we run a monitoring program. So it's all our consented, some complaint response and the other associated activities. And that all sits under Sean's portfolio. So I'll leave Sean to introduce.
Great, welcome, Sean.
Thank you, Madam Chair and councillors. Thanks very much for the opportunity to be able to present this report to you. It is a fairly broad picture of what we are doing within our compliance on wastewater, but it is just an introduction to you all in terms of what is going on within the portfolio. Can I take it that the report has been read and everybody's happy in it so far? And having done that, I'd like to highlight just two areas that are probably pertinent to this meeting today. That is the first one being council's dry weather and wet weather overflows, starting on page 13. Under our current rules and framework, discharge of untreated wastewater from any network or anywhere is prohibited and can't be consented as it stands at the moment. And all discharges are reported to council and other departments within council and outside of council, with the thought of with council having to investigate each and every single one of them and look at each and every single one of them. To date, the council, the compliance department has found that the actions of the utility provider, as in council it is at the moment, has complied with all provisions under the RMA and TRMP in their responsibilities. And the second point, we are aware of a number of catchments that have got degrading water quality within the district, and that some of those that degradation will be from human wastewater within our catchments, and will continue to develop monitoring programs and strategies to identify those areas of non-compliance and resolve them to the best of our abilities as it stands at the moment. If there are any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Kinnemont.
Sean, thank you, and welcome to the beehive, whatever you call it.
Thank you.
The dry wet weather overflows.
Yes.
We had a chap in here early on talking about the same thing. And you say that you raise these issues through the management and back up to this level here. At the time of when the overflow is happening, what do you do with publicising it then and keeping iwi and locals involved?
So from the way things happen at the moment, if there is a wet weather or a dry weather overflow, that is reported to me. That report also goes to several other areas within council, one of them public health. There's signage that gets put out at the time of the discharge, water sampling that is taken under direction from public health. And then from a compliance point of view, I then look at whether it falls within the RMA and TRMP and what actions are required from that point of view.
And just one last thing from me, the photographs I saw before of wastewater discharge into Mapua Channel didn't have any signage. And I'm not too sure whether the public and the fishing fraternity knew not to take fish species from the wastewater, from the Mapua Channel at the time.
So at that particular time, we were under, there were, I think it was 9 discharges around the district where our network was failing with the amount of rain that we had. And yes, we ran out of signs, unfortunately.
Do we have enough signs now? Yeah.
Madam Chair. I guess on behalf of the compliance team, I probably need to differentiate a few things. So we don't control any of the actual ongoing activities that are occurring at the time of a discharge or an emergency event. Because we're the regulator, we sort of step back and we are just part of that process. So in regards to the control of signage and notification of iwi and that's not a kind of responsibility for us. So that's the operator of the system. So I guess some of these questions, if you wanted to pose that question, probably needs to go to the operator. It's not a part that we oversee, just to make that clear. Councillor Kim.
Yes, Kim. Thanks, Kim.
Yes, so notwithstanding the position that the compliance team have, the role that they've got in this, the committee here serves as a clearinghouse for those sorts of situations for all the things that are going on. So for instance, when the August event happened, there was quite a long drawn out discussion of all of the things consequential to the wastewater overflows, which included connecting to the messages coming out of the District Health Board, who are the ones who say you should not or you cannot take shellfish. But we also worked in with the iwi networks who had placed rahui in in place which stopped the gathering of shellfish for quite a defined period. And rather than try and invent or affect our own way of delivering that, which would be arguable that we have responsibility, our job is to reinforce the message that iwi were putting out there and join with them in partnership for spreading the word. And that seemed to be quite effective in the sense that we certainly know that we didn't get any, outbreaks of eating contaminated shellfish as a consequence. But of course, each individual New Zealander has a right to go fishing under their own auspices, and many of them don't necessarily heed the advice they're given.
Yes, councillor Walker and then councillor McKenzie.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I'm looking at the report, Sean, and it's item number 1.10. So the council has stated that the environment monitoring has identified these 5 waterways with fecal contamination. And then at the bottom of that paragraph, it talks about investigation of wastewater systems. And these catchments will be required. I'm just wondering if that's a work in progress. Do we have an estimated time of when we might start that, and how is that being resourced? Thanks.
I'll pass this on to Cole.
So, Councillor Walker, through the chair. So you obviously received the State and Environment report that came through from Trevor James into I think it was the Operations Committee, which highlighted that there are 8 catchments. Obviously, we don't know whether human effluent is a signature in all of those, but there are certainly 1 or 2 that one we know of. Obviously, the Tasman Valley Stream, and one we suspect may have. So yes, we have a strategy now where we are going to have to try to address that. There are things that we can do. So Tasman Valley Stream at the moment, we're currently working through Lucas team, through a catchment facilitator as well to try and get grab the low-hanging fruit, so to speak. So in regards to Tasman Valley, we're going to start to do some additional sampling now, try to identify sources, try and eliminate those, and with a bit of luck. It is quite a big scale, so I mean we'll have to, obviously it's a big elephant, so we'll have to try and go for it in bite-sized pieces. So I think some monitoring of that catchment to try and localize it, and then just target those where we find there's non-compliance. A breach in wastewater system will be the responsible for them, and it could be one, or there could be a number, and we'll deal with those through the regulatory process. By doing that, hopefully we should see a turnaround. We won't address all the catchment issues, but we can certainly target some of the wastewater, because I use the example of Little Sydney stream, where there were a number of wastewater systems that were directly discharging in, and we found those, and by knocking them out, it did turn around that degradation reason quickly to a certain extent. We know that there's issues, so we will be targeting them with bespoke programs.
So my last point was, thank you for that explanation, and I'm glad that there's some mahi being done. I guess my last question was around how are we resourcing it? Have we got the resources, or is that something that will come back to us to have to sign off on, that we're going to pinch from Peter to pay Paul kind of system? That's not a reflection on our staff, by the way.
It's certainly to do a whole of catchment approach, like if we were going to just go straight for going in, like, and the reality is some of this work is going to take a lot of time. So if we had resourcing, yes, we could absolutely. The reality is, in these type of catchment assessments, what we would have to do is identify the potential sources and then do all that background research, and then engage the people that have the ability to go in and do catchment-wide surveys of systems. So if we were just going to take a whole of catchment approach and get in there, it takes a lot of time and money. So at the moment we are doing sort of what, I wouldn't use the word piecemeal, but we are doing what we can where we can. But like, I guess that the problem I suspect will happen is that as we delve into more of these through sampling and other catchment assessment strategies that we have, we'll probably expose a lot more of this as well. This is only one of a number of catchments I suspect that are not in the state of the environment monitoring. I know it's a gloomy picture, but it's probably reality. They're all permitted activity, old on-site systems.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie. And then Councillor Kinnan-Mons.
Thank you through you, Chair. So I just thank you, Sean and Carl, for coming along. The report was interesting, huge amount of information in there that I wasn't necessarily across. I guess I want to come back to the presentation that we had at the start of the meeting from Jan with respect to the wastewater overflows in Mapua. And would this be the appropriate time to lock in an action if we could get a response from the council staff to all of the points that Jan has raised in his slides? And also it would need to be a joined up response, because obviously some of the issues are to do with our compliance regulatory function, but some of the issues are actually to do with us as a network operator. So through this committee, can we get a joined up response to the points that Jan has raised?
Thanks.
Sorry.
Well, yeah, and Kim might have a response after you.
I don't see why we couldn't get a response to him or through the committee to respond to the issues that were raised. A lot of them I feel that we have raised and we have addressed with them when they sent through their request for information earlier on in the piece. But yeah, I don't have anything else to say apart from anything that Kim might have to address.
Through the chair, perhaps if I could just sort of tie together a number of threads that I guess have led to the presentation of this particular report coming in front of the committee today. We, with our compliance team, are required to deliver a 6-monthly and a 12-monthly report to the committee to talk about all of the wide-ranging compliance activity that's going on across the council under various statutes. So that's our ongoing commitment. And I guess in recent times, with Trevor bringing to the operations committee a sense that some of the septic tank use is now having an impact on our waterways to the extent that he's suggesting that some dedicated resource be put to tracking that, finding that and dealing with it. And also we have interest from the likes of the Mapua observing the extent of the wastewater overflows that happened at the time of the storm events and culminating in Jan's presentation here today. The idea is that we'll take wastewater out of that broader compliance story and present it as a package, because it's got so many moving parts. When you see a system that is around about 60% municipal and 40% individual systems that are sometimes consented, sometimes permitted activities, and sometimes that historic that people possibly don't even know they've even got them. That scenario is playing out across the region. So Sean is looking to bring the story together to say, what is the wastewater discharge story that happens in our district with all its historic elements to it? Getting back to Jan is of a view that there ought to be a particular planning framework put in place which generates the ability to create consents, and then those consents can be monitored and a more finer scale activity. And in some councils, as we've heard, Nelson may be one example, the planning framework allows for that. And certainly my experience in Canterbury was that we specifically did that. We had a broken system, which the earthquakes absolutely broke, but prior to the earthquake, it was still leaking like a sieve. And there was a real tension between the regulator looking to avoid, to ensure that overflows didn't happen, and the network provider who simply had a system that they just could not guarantee its integrity. And so where you struck a consenting regime to say so many of them are okay, but one more is not, that was a really finely balanced discussion. And then how did you detect when there was an overflow? And so it was a real cat and mouse game between the regulator and the network provider, trying to figure out what the consenting regime from the network provider's point of view was. How do they continue to do what they need to do and get 90% of the stuff out and appropriately? And how do they not
be required to make investments that simply their community couldn't afford, versus a regulator's perspective of saying, how do we stop this activity from actually influencing waterways at all? So the situation, so that's sort of what Jan was saying, is that sort of game we ought to be playing in this district, and therefore the planning framework should be interpreted in a way that supports that. Our planning framework that we've currently got doesn't permit that in our eyes, and our interpretation of it is it's simply not possible. It's a prohibited activity. You cannot authorise something along those lines. And indeed, Te Mana o Te Wai, the framework that is increasingly coming in through the law and been giving legal effect, says the same thing. It doesn't want the activity of something quite disdainful to be authorised and contaminate our waterways. So we've got a very strong platform to say no, and then it means that we have to lean on, well, the RMA recognises the world's not perfect, and it provides provision for, under certain circumstances, such overflows to occur, and it recognises that in terms of an emergency, and when an emergency happens, there's a number of obligations that follow. We've tracked the failure of our systems in the emergency, and we've looked at the material that came before us from a compliance perspective, and we've assessed that those were real emergencies. There are lessons for the network provider, but they couldn't have been overcome given the flexibility that RMA allows for such things to occur under an emergency. The other aspect we've got to consider is that people going about doing things have defences that are available to them, and that's outside of the emergencies, and we must also consider the defences that are in play before we make a decision whether someone's culpable for that particular action. And so I think everything we heard from Jan today is actually on the money, but it's in a world that we don't quite have the ability to operate in at the moment. Our new plan, a Tasman Environment Plan, or a joined up plan, if it gets that way with Nelson, will actually have to confront these things and establish a completely new framework, drawing on all of those expectations. So I sort of think it's a little bit limited value to go back to Jan's particular 4 or 5 points and say, can we do those right here and now? Because many of those aspirations require a conversation that is more LTP, long-term plan orientated, than a here and now orientated one. So, you know, I think we can, and we have helped the Mapua Residents Association and Jan with perspectives. I think what we heard today is Jan doesn't accept that, but that is our view of how the law sits at the moment. It's not what we're aspiring to, but it's where we're at. So my thought is there's limited value in taking up particular recommendations at this time, spending a lot of time and resource framing answers around them, when in fact the ground could be shifting on us at any moment and a new set of arrangements come and play. And then we suddenly shift our aspirations and our targets to fit that new arrangement. So that's how I sort of see things.
Thank you. That's helpful to have that outline. Because I know that one of the things that Jan said was that we're hiding behind, we've got an intention to be illegal. And I assume that what he's referring to is that we say the TRMP doesn't allow us to have a consent for prohibited activity. And would that be the hiding behind you think that he's perhaps speaking to?
Through the chair, he gave that a legal assessment in 2 things. One was that we were, there were overflows and therefore they are illegal. That is not the case. The law, the statute, which sits above our plan, actually provides for overflows to occur in certain situations. We can, that's provided to us. So the RMA has a degree of discretion on it. So it's not illegal, but we have to check what's happened against what the RMA says can happen in those events. The second thing he said was illegal is that our infrastructure planning is not aspiring to zero overflow. So the second thing he said is we're not designing our systems to avoid that happening in totality. That's not illegal. That's actually about where you put your risk threshold.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's a matter of the law. So it's not drawing on any legal aspiration. So I think it's not quite the case that anything we're doing is illegal in this council, but you could always argue that we could do better. And I guess, you know, that's something that Richard and his team are, you know, dealing with all the time. How can we improve the service that we provide and the effectiveness of it, while having conversations with us, my side as the regulator, making sure that, you know, best endeavours are always in place. And in the future, it might be a new entity that we're regulating.
Yeah.
And I, you know, very keen to maintain an even hand
and not suddenly, change our spots, because an approach we've been doing now, when we're doing it in-house, suddenly we change to another approach because we're now, regulating a third party. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really important that we keep a level playing field here.
It is, and I think it's really important that we're very clear, when we're in the business of holding consents for the network and the various consents we hold around wastewater, and we're the regulator, we have to be very clear to the public and in public forums how we're regulating and how we're addressing and making account of, in this case, overflows and emergency events. Yeah, I've appreciated your reports earlier for our previous meetings where you've been leading us towards this really in terms of emergency management and emergency response and the regulatory response to those. Councillor Kinnemont and then Councillor Bryant and Councillor Walker.
Thank you. Through the chair, I've got two questions. Mr. Drummond, thank you so much for that. Having sat through Jan's presentations 3 times now, something like that, they don't change a lot and he's still pointing in the same direction. If you could please find some time to come to the MDCA meeting, and that would alleviate a lot of fears behind the scenes. 10 minutes of your time, I think, would solve a lot of issues there. So can you consider that? Secondly, Trinity Walker was talking about, Councillor Walker was talking about catchment plans. There's a lot of knowledge of catchment plans, catchment areas, wetlands, current and old ones that are in the community. And I would sincerely hope that if we were going to do any catchment plans, that these people were asked for input and the input was acknowledged. It's not just an internal document, I presume, that we're going out to, when we're doing these catchment plans, we're talking to some of the landowners, the forest and birds, the water and wetland specialists.
I don't have anything through the chair. I don't have anything to respond to with regards to that. It's not part of my portfolio in regards to.
If I could, through the chair, just speak to that, councillor. So there's the catchment plans, which we're bringing that story back to this committee, and that's, Rob's going to have that included in his report. That's one of the action items. And then there's catchment management, which is the broader framework that is being put in place through Merca's team. And that is very much involving conversations with everyone that is active inside those catchments, indeed actively seeking them out to see what sort of input they can add, because that has got a much broader landscape than the focus of catchment plans, which have become a particular thing. So where the council is taking its capabilities into the broader catchment management, which picks up everything that's going on inside a catchment, not just particular whether it's stormwater, wastewater functions. So that's the ground that we're moving to, and the catchment facilitators are starting that by starting those conversations and drawing in all of the members of the communities that can contribute to that discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Bryant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the chair, just a question to Sean in relation to the number of non-compliant consents. Do we have any sort of breakdown of how many of them are on-site wastewater treatment, modern systems for residential drillings, and is there any breakdown of how many are larger users, for the want of a better word, I guess? Because I understand that some of the on-site wastewater treatments for just the residential drilling, sometimes it can be a technicality that they're not compliant around paperwork or something like that.
Through the chair, thank you very much. Yes, it is very much. I can't give you a breakdown in terms of our larger communities on-site wastewater schemes like Appleby Hills or and those kind of infrastructures. I haven't got a breakdown of which are compliant and which ones are are not in comparison to the individual wastewater systems that are for each individual house. But as a whole, the non-compliance is around the paperwork portion of that is supplied to council. We spend a huge amount of time chasing consent holders for information that they are receiving or that they do have, and that forms part of the non-compliance portion of it. The smaller portion of non-compliance is not related to the discharge. It is around the management of paperwork within those systems. I am busy trying to work on a way of being able to break that out over a period of time. It's not that easy within the systems that we've got within council at the moment to be able to do that. But it is in the forethought of my mind in terms of how we can go about those that are non-compliant in paperwork portion of it and those that are non-compliant in the actual working of the system. It is something that I am busy working on at the moment. As to how successful I'm going to be, I am not 100% sure, but it is definitely part of where I would like to take this portfolio.
That would be very interesting. Do you have any sort of lay of the land? What sort of percentage might be just paperwork, where it might be half, 75%? And I understand quite often it's that sometimes they have a provider that hasn't always provided the householder with paperwork. So it's quite a complex system.
It is. It does rely on the servicing agents supplying us that information. And I would probably say that you're probably looking 80 to 90% of the non-compliance is around that paperwork side of things in comparison to the non-compliance. Having said that, though, those are the consented wastewater systems that we have. It's probably reversed in the permitted activity portion that we have, because people don't their wastewater systems are not forefront in their thought of mind on a regular basis.
Until something goes wrong.
Until something goes wrong. And unfortunately, sometimes it's a long time until something goes wrong. And a lot of the systems that we have within our district are older systems, and they have their own issues around how well they treat their wastewater before they discharge. And for a large portion of those that we're seeing in the catchment, in Trevor's results and catchment results, those are from those systems that are probably older than they probably should be within our district.
Particularly for older dwellings, that's not hard to imagine, but I am quite concerned about this paperwork thing. And as you say, you're doing some work on it, because we're saying we've got all these ones that are not compliant, but they're only not compliant because someone hasn't done the paperwork.
It's not only the paperwork, but it's actually having done it on time. And that's the biggest portion. I mean, we can only go on what the consent allows us to be able to report on. And that is what we are chasing at the moment.
Are the systems getting so improved that we don't need to do this paperwork? Because I have had that thought relayed to me as well.
Do you want to give some explanation of what that paperwork is? The service.
Are we still in scope? Yeah.
I feel like we are. The paperwork that's required is around the fact that the system has been serviced, and that paperwork gets sent to council, and that the system has the bigger systems have their management plans in place. The sampling portion of that allows us to be able to see that the system is operating at its optimum and peak, and those are a smaller portion of the non-compliances. Seeing as those are we only monitor most of our on-site wastewater systems are only monitored 3 times in their life before they hit the end of their life. So we monitor at 6, 12 and 24 months at the beginning to make sure that the system is up and running and working correctly. And we're finding that then we're not meeting, the systems are not meeting the consented limits within those parameters.
Thank you. Do other districts have similar issues in terms of that compliance around, the majority being relating to servicing and what we're calling paperwork?
Madam Chair, yes, throughout the district or throughout the country, we're experiencing the same issues.
Nothing special about us.
No, nothing special about us.
Okay, that's great. Yeah. Councillor Walker and then Councillor Maru.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Kim Drummond, for your response with regards to what Jan brought to us in his presentation. I guess I just feel a little uncomfortable, or slightly more than a little, around us being able to acknowledge that, we're aware of things and that we are going to be addressing it in the TEP. Because for me, that's a 10-year in the making plan. And if we've identified and we're aware, and as Jan's presented to us, I don't find comfort in knowing that in 10 years' time, Tasman District Council will have changed something. I just, I personally don't sit comfortably with knowing that.
That's through the chair. It's if I'm reading you right, Councillor Walker, you are interested in seeing the council move towards a better system sooner rather than later. And I guess what we're saying is that right now, are we in a situation where what is happening is in keeping with the legal framework? And the answer to that is yes, we think we are. But you're keen to start the discussion that gets us to an improved place, because we can all see we can do that sooner rather than later. Yeah. So do you think that that's beyond an LTP discussion? Because I was sort of thinking that as Jan was sort of indicating the timeframes to get to where we need to be, he was sort of talking about 5 years. If we pushed it into the LTP discussion, that's about the timeframe we can start to see all things being equal and funding being available, etc., priorities being set. We could see those sorts of things coming into play.
Well, definitely, I would like to see it in the long-term plan. However, I understand, and I may have got it wrong, that we need to change the plan to be able to implement it, which is so it comes out of the TRMP and becomes the new TEP. And I don't think the long-term plan addresses that. But definitely the funding side would be addressed in the long-term plan. And maybe I've got that wrong, and maybe you could clarify that for me. Thanks. Someone.
Thank you, Leith.
Good afternoon. Probably I can clarify that a little bit. We've got the land and water plan coming up to be notified by the end of 2024. So that's not necessarily part of the TEP. That's the stuff earlier that we've got to do as part of the freshwater package. And it's likely that a review of the wastewater rules could be part of that. So it's not likely to be 5 or 10 years out. It's likely to be a lot shorter period of time than that before we get into that detail. Obviously, it's got some significant challenges with the discharge of untreated wastewater to water from an iwi perspective, and we'll have to work through those.
Thank you. Councillor Maru.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is a similar lines to Councillor Walker and Councillor Mackenzie's, in that I guess, Mr. Drummond, in terms of responding to Jan's concerns, I think it's fair and reasonable to respond to them. And you've given good answers to the committee here today. Because I guess it's, and you do it very well, but making sure that the regulatory part of this function is kept separate from the council and the operational part of this function. So I think your explanations were fair in terms of the answers to the concerns Jan raised, but I think it's fair for him to ask and get a response from council for those questions.
Thank you. Last one, I think, councillor.
Thank you. Through the chair, councillor Kinnon there.
Yeah, I'm more making the point. You've had a few.
I'll get the last chance.
Goes.
I fully support councillor Walker's comments there. And I think that's all been taken on by everybody here. And you chose, Lisa, chose the word likely to be included. I would say I'd like to see the word more than likely to be included. I'd like to see some sort of positive, yes, we will include it into it.
Through the chair, it's your plan. You can.
Lovely response. Well done. Thank you, everybody. That's been well canvassed, and I appreciate the responses that we've had, Kim, from you and from staff. The resolution is to receive the report. Somebody willing to move? Thank you, councillor Mailing, and seconder. Councillor Dowler. I'll put the resolution. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Sean and Carl. And we move to the last item on the agenda, Building Assurance Managers Report. Matt, welcome.
Good afternoon all, and through the chair, I'd like to take my report as being read, but I would like to just go through a couple of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, just in relation to the stats for the building consents issued over the last, this coming year from July last year through to March. We're pretty much on track to the same amount as 2019, 2020 year. They're still about 3 months short of those stats. Last week, we did have an influx on building consents due to the changes in the energy efficiency building code. There's implementation was come into force on Monday, on the 1st of May. So there's going to be significant changes to the wall and floor and roof insulation. So that's, yeah, so we got an extra 25 consents last week, which is pretty much double of what we normally get. So I just want to get all those through the door before the changes, because there's going to be some quite significant changes in cost, design. Yeah, there's been a lot of learnings over the last year or two, just getting everyone upskilled to cope with this. Industry's taken a couple of years to get there. So I think moving forward from 1st of May, we're going to, I don't know whether the consents are going to drop slightly, but yeah, they're definitely going to be a little more expensive to build these houses to cope with these new changes. So there's going to be a bit of angst, I think, in the community for new home builders or homeowners, etc. And I did state in the report that we've been on top of our inspections, but in the last 2 weeks we have got a little bit behind due to holidays and sickness and whatever. So we're 4 days out now, so we are starting to claw that back now. So I'd say by the end of next week we should be back on target. And the challenges we're having, it's still challenging to recruit qualified people. We've got 2 vacancies and we just can't fill them for the lack of competent staff. And yeah, it's just been a struggle. So we have got the contractors in place to cover that shortfall, but ideally we would like some competent people out there to apply for the jobs. And unfortunately, they're just not there. Other than that, yeah, any questions? Quite happy to answer.
Thank you, Matt. Councillor Shellcrace and then Councillor Malin. Yep.
Just on the cost increases, any idea roughly how much
No. No, I guess to give you an indication, like the insulation on it, so on a standard sort of a house, the insulation in the ceiling will be doubled. So if you're looking at pink bats, you're doubling that, so that's double the cost of insulation there. Some of the walls they may have to, and rather than having 4x2 walls, you might have to have 6x2 walls, so timber and your insulation to take over the thickness, and extra insulation on the concrete floor. So that's those sort of costs. So they're going to be quite significant.
Yeah. And are they just driven by are they changes we have to make?
Yeah.
So
yeah. It's been coming about for the last couple of years, and they've sort of doing 3 stages of implementing some of these just to get the industry ready.
Do you think that might prompt a bit of going back to piled sort of houses versus your concrete?
Yes and well, yes
I mean,
and no,
insulation's
they've still got to insulate there. So if you have less insulation on the floor, that means you need to put more on the walls, more in the ceilings. You'll be looking at that's the other thing, you're looking at your doors and your windows.
Yeah.
So your triple glaze, argon glass.
So it's going to be
it's going to be an interesting time, unfortunately. But it's obviously all about energy efficiency. But it's hard to put a figure on it, but it's going to be costly, I think.
Thank you. Councillor Mailing and then Councillor Walker.
Thanks for your report, Matt. Recently, I counted the number of houses under construction in Berryfields, and then it was 93 on Anzac Day currently. So you get a good feel for the industry, and developers tell me that the sections aren't selling as quickly. Are you anticipating that you will start to see this slow down? I know you said it in your report, but
I've been anticipating that for quite some time, and it's not happening. I feel after the 1st of May, a couple of days ago, I think it's definitely going to slow down because of this extra cost. Like we obviously had a peak a couple of years ago, and I think that was due to the interest rates are going down, and obviously now they've gone up, and people can't get enough money. And but I'm sort of anticipating it, but it just hasn't happened yet.
I was surprised when I counted that many.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So none of these houses were finished, and I counted if it had a piece of concrete or they'd started to mark it out. So that was just in Berryfields in the Meadows. There was 93, and they're still doing stuff, and that wasn't counting Hart Rise and the other parts of Richmond. So we'll be over 100.
Yeah. Oh yeah, easily. Yeah.
I really appreciate that on Anzac Day you came up with this. I was very pleased that on a public holiday you would come up with a set of criteria for what you would include in your assessments. It's fantastic.
I'm a nerd, and I'm always going around my town to know what's happening.
It's great to hear, isn't it, eh?
Could get you in as an inspector. We need another inspector, so you can jump on board. No.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you, through Madam Chair. Thank you for your report, Matt, and appreciate staff having to or needing to take annual leave and also the sickness that hovers around our community. I'm looking at your building compliance chart, which is bullet 5, I think. And I'm looking at your notices to fix that were issued. And if you compare it to June 2020, 29, and now we're looking at July or March period 2023, and we've zoomed up to 43. Just wondering, is there some trends happening there? Is there some patterns? Why is it pretty much almost doubled?
Yeah, I would take that as being, sorry, through the chair, I'd take that as more inspections are being done as far as the pools and the BWAF audits. Less, we obviously do the softly approach first, and then if we don't get any joy out of that, then we have to issue the notice to folks. There's no fee that goes with the notice now, so it's probably a little easier to issue them, but they're easier to follow up. This following process. So I think a lot of it is generally people are ignoring our requests to get compliance with whatever the issues are on site.
So if I may, through you, Chair, so is the process different
No.
No, so you're still issuing notices. So I guess I want to know, those notices to fix, are they all pools or are they other things? Because that's quite a big jump. And I hear that you're saying people aren't acknowledging them, but that's not changing that we're doing notices to fix, is it? It doesn't change the data.
Through the chair. No, it doesn't change. What the process hasn't changed, apart from we don't charge for the notice to fix now. But
So
there's
the
more.
financials change.
Yeah, so there's more pool inspections. What do we got there? Yeah, so it's only changed by 8 inspections a month. But yeah, I guess there's more non-compliance for finding. That's probably what it boils down to. There's so much non-compliance out there. So, and the more it's the more difficult it is to get someone to fix whatever issue they've got. We start using that tool then. So maybe some people are just a bit more not interested in listening to us, I guess. But I could look further into that. But that's my thinking behind it.
So you're saying that the trend is for more non-compliance issues?
Yes.
It's a concern, isn't it?
It's a concern, but this is the only way we can deal with the issues.
Yeah.
Like if we've got a pool there, we've got to, and we say, hey, you've got a couple of weeks to sort this out. And don't you sort it out, then we issue a notice to fix.
Okay.
Yeah. Because we're getting through a lot more pools than we were previous year. There's an extra 200 pools that we found in the last 12 months.
All right. Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you. Any further questions? And is somebody happy to move? Thank you. Sure.
Differentiate between areas, because I'm just struggling a little bit to think down here in this warm country, you need all that insulation.
Yep.
I understand out at Tapawera and Murchison, but really.
Yeah, through the chair. Yes, you're right. We're in zone 3, and weirdly it takes into account the lakes, and I think it changes to zone 4 once you get sort of past Otago or something. I can't remember the exact area, but
for us it's the same, right?
It's pretty much across the entire region. Yeah.
Well, within our modern house, at night sometimes it's that warm we have to open it.
Yeah.
So I don't know, and it was built 5 years ago. So I don't know why you want to put all this extra like it just because they're so airtight. Yeah, you'd be cooking.
Yeah, and unfortunately, this is obviously MB have put this together, and there's been submissions, and they've still come out with, well, they come out with a few changes, but nothing that's going to help anyone. So money
just seems crazy.
Yeah, I agree.
What is the industry? I mean, obviously they wouldn't be.
Oh no, no one's happy about it. No. This is why it's taken 2 years to
the insulation guys.
Yeah, well, they'll be, but to be fair, they're probably not that happy either, because it's quite hard to meet the requirements that they want, that we're after. So,
report.
Thank you. I'm glad that you're toasty and warm in your home. That's great to know. Have we got a seconder for the report? Councillor Ellis, thank you. Great to hear about the in-house training for the Building Consents team working well.
Yes, great. It's made a huge difference. We've got a good team going there now. We've got what we have for quite some time. The competency levels are up. We can start moving them forward. Hopefully, start dropping a few contractors. So, yeah, more we can keep in house and retain these people, the better. So, hopefully, we can do that.
Yeah, and you're another team that's working under constraint, and you speak about that people are managing well, and I'm assuming that managers are really attending to teams that are under a lot of pressure and or under some pressure.
Yeah.
So it's we've used the word tension a few times today, and so if you could pass on our appreciation for the way that your team is managing and going through its work. And just want to acknowledge the some of the stats that you provided today in terms of what you're meeting. They look really good. And when I see that multiple dwelling consents are getting issued, I like that. I know that could be a range of things, but yeah, it's good to see acknowledgement of that happening.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Is it?
Oh, yeah, no, it's looking really good, and we are busy, obviously. But yeah, we're not obviously going to get to the figures that we got in 2020, 2021. But yeah, there's a lot of dwellings out there, eh? But like I say, those consents, the dwelling consents could be a wood burner. Yeah, there'd be some of those could be in there. We can't drill right down.
Yeah.
But we've drilled down as much as we can.
Great, thank you, Matt. I need to put the resolution, I think, which is to receive the report. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thanks, Matt, and to the team.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Cheers. Thanks.
Lovely, thank you. And just a reminder that if we've got questions that are, of some detail, to take up the email invitation that comes out prior to all of our meetings, to send through to staff so they can come prepared if there's something that's quite specific or detailed. And before we go to a closing karakia, we've covered everything, haven't we?
We have.
Just like to come back to you, Kim. We might go to Steve. In response to Forest and Birds presentation and some questions raised there, we've got a
less of a response to any questions, but while that presentation was going on, I was having a conversation with Rob via Teams, and he mentioned that it was unfortunate that we didn't get to see the Rivers report in our workshop earlier on this morning, because that did speak to some of the techniques that were mentioned as being desirous in the presentation given by Forest and Bird. So we are making inroads into that space, and we are changing some of the things that we're doing. And so the advice to councillors would just be to look out for when that paper next comes up at a workshop, and to receive it in the context of the Forest and Bird presentation as well.
great, and it will, it might be horse, cart, not sure, but this way around is good, going to be effective too, isn't it? That we've seen the presentation, and then we're going to have our discussion. Before we come over to you, Kim, for a closing karakia, thank you to Elaine and Rachel on flight deck today.
You too.
Thank you all for your contributions, councillors, and to staff and managers. Please pass on our appreciation for the work that we know. There's a lot of work going on in behind all the time, and we come here for a couple of hour meeting and look at reports, but and can be, maybe brief over some things, but we certainly very much appreciate all the work that you're doing. Thank you. I'll come to you, Kim, for your closing karakia. Thank you.
With the permission of the chair, just before I do that, I just wonder if it'd be worth wrapping up where to go with the presentation from Jan, because I sort of got the sense there was there's some expectation. So my suggestion is that what I take from this is the committee provided support for a considered response to be provided to Jan, and so I would, from staff, and so I'm taking that would be a useful thing to do, and to share that response with the chair, and the chair could send it around committee members.
Yes, definitely.
And also to make ourselves available to Mike to directly talk to them, the Residents Association, if such an invite would come our way. So those would be the two action items I take out of that presentation, if that's acceptable.
Thank you. Very acceptable.
Right, now to the karakia. Kia hiki te kororo, kia wātia, kia mama, kia te manawa, o te tangata. Kia u ki te ara mō tātou e ora nei, o rongo ki runga, kia tina, hui e tai ki e.
Good, everybody.
And that's up on the screen.
Oh, that's
Not that.
Very